What's up, folks? How we living? Hope you guys are living well. So today I wanted to really just deep dive right into it and deep dive into a concept that I've been working on a lot lately. And it's really starting to take form and create a structure to it and a system to it. And I'm going to take a swing for it. I'm going to take a swing with you guys right now with it. So I don't have a name for stuff. Whenever I make content, I don't have a name for stuff. I don't have titles for stuff. Meaning this does this, or breathing creates. I don't know. I never have titles for content. So maybe if you guys have a title, you can throw it at me and see if it works. I wouldn't say I'm opposed to a title. I never really care about that. Right? I guess my last book, Without Words, that's a title. And that makes sense to me in a book side. But if we're talking about content and more of a philosophical sense, overarching view of what life is or how to live life, that I never really have a title to. So one of the things that I used to do when I was first presenting. So when I was presenting the first speech in my mind, I taught when I was 22. I think I was 22 years old, 23 years old. Whatever. I just started teaching at Minnesota State, and I was given curriculums to teach for the university. And that was a little bit easier because it was handed to me from previous professors. But so I didn't really have a ton of time to really break down my content or create content in my own structure, my own curriculum, if you will. And then a couple years ago, or a couple years after that, I got invited. I got my first paid speaking gig was at Northern Iowa NIA Northern Iowa Area Community College, NIACC, NIAC. I don't know if it. I think that's how it is. Northern Iowa Area Community College, NIAC. Super successful for these couple years that I was working with them. I ended up working with them a few more times, but they were the first people that ever paid me to speak. And when I spoke there, I was given 2 hours allotted to my time. And in those 2 hours, I had to create a curriculum that I spoke on. Now, I don't remember how I came a part of this, but I used to have this system that I called the Diamond Series. Metaphorically, is based off of baseball. So picturing a baseball diamond, home plate, first base, second base, third base. And home plate was purpose. Right, it was sort of a vision, or not, sorry, it wasn't a vision, it was purpose, it was your why. And then, but in order to get home, so you started with your why and you came back to your why at home plate. In order to get all the way around the bases, you would go to first base. And at first base, that was more of your values and your standards. This is actually a really good exercise for me to go through right now. I haven't talked about this in a long time. But you would go down to first base, and that's basically where we started, right? So you get there and you establish your principles, your standards, and your values for living. And you try to keep those short, right? 3 to 5 principle standard values that sort of put you on the path. And from the principles or the values that you have, the standards that you have, that becomes the systems, which was second base. So systems could be like a process, right? Like you have a process in place. But I think we turned the word from process to systems. And your systems are things that are part of your daily habits, right? So you have a system in place. You have a system to delegate in your business, whatever. But you have a system in place. For me, the system is when I wake up, it's hydration, it's meditation, and it's coffee and journaling. And that's just like my morning system. It's like my morning routine. And depending on the time of the week or the time of place that I'm in or wherever I'm at in the world or what I'm doing for work at that certain time, the system it has the ability to maneuver itself based off of variables. So if it needs to be an hour long system, I have it in place for an hour-long system. If that needs to be a 30-minute system, I can get it into that 30-minute window. And if that needs to be a 3-hour window, I can get it into a 3-hour window. It wouldn't really matter. It's just a morning system that I use, right? And then you get over to third base, and that's your vision. So you're sort of thinking about something of the future. What excitement of the future draws you to get all the way to third? And what do you see? What's the thing that's pulling you forward? It's always easier to be excited about a future rather than be hung up in guilt and shame of the past, right? Or pulling the past with you. It's easier on your psyche or your excitement levels to let go of that and to have something out in front of you that is pulling you forward. And that's like legging out a triple in sports. And then when you come around for the home run and you touch home again, now you're a new you. It's like in a way, I don't think I was exposed to the hero's journey by Joseph Campbell back then, or all the concepts of rebirth or those systems. But in a way, it's like a rebirth, right? And so you start at home, you finish at home, but you got to go all the way around the bases to establish that. And the Diamond Series is always evolving. So your standards are always changing or sharpening or improving. Your systems are always changing. That's probably what I would consider one of the more changeable ones is your systems at second base, which makes sense because you're halfway home. So you're not there yet, but you got to make some adjustments. And then at third base, right, that's the vision. I think visions are always changing as well, but I don't think it's a micro and a macro vision. So at a macro level, I don't think that's going to change often. At a micro level, I think you'll have little micro adjustments or you reach little goals and you change up to the next vision ahead of you. Sure. And then your mission, your why, it's somewhat sustainable, but it's also changing as well, right? When you get married, your purpose changes. When you have a kid, your purpose changes. When you get a new job, your purpose changes. You get mature, purpose changes, et cetera, et cetera. So I use that structure, I use that system to teach, and it went really well. It was really well received. Granted, I was talking to baseball players, so that's probably what helped. But it didn't just land in baseball. I started to expand that thought process into other sports and even businesses. And I was able to use that analogy for a few years. And I used that over and over and over again because one, it worked, but and still, even as I say it right now, I still think that's a very valuable framework to create as a philosophy and as a byproduct. I think that you're going to have better behaviors and you'll at least have some sort of direction that you're on. That evolved into, and I didn't have a title for this, so that was titled the Diamond Series. When I got away from that, I didn't have a title for this one, but the one that I changed over and became more familiar with was I used to put it into like a 3-pillar system. So you'd have psychology, you'd have awareness at part one, you'd have problem solving as part two, and you would have physiology as part three. So it's like bullet points. And you would actually start at the bottom first. So you would start with physiology, which is what got me into breathing so aggressively, because now all of a sudden you could measure a little bit of the nervous system by things like a breath hold or CO2, carbon dioxide tolerance test, which basically measures the length of an exhalation. And those things, they help. You can use HRV systems, you can use heart rate monitors, anything that really tracks somewhat of the physiology and the movement of the inner workings of the body. That's sort of how you understand physiology. And then you incorporate a ton of protocols or modalities to strengthen your physiology, be able to allow you to handle more stress, have a bigger stress tolerance, a bigger bucket, if you will. And then that would, as your bucket expanded, basically as simple as it put, getting healthier. As you got healthier and your bucket expands, then you have a bigger space to solve problems, to be a decision maker. And I took that system too from Viktor Frankl, who wrote the book Man's Search for Meaning. And he wrote stimulus, space, response or reaction. So essentially, and he wrote that book based off of the Holocaust. It's a great book, Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. I read it after I got done with baseball because Tony Robbins was suggesting that book a lot, a little over 10 years ago. And so I read that book, and I really liked that. And there's a lot of people who use that concept. The concept is very simple. It's basically you have a container, in this analogy, this visual concept of space in your thinking. And when the space minimizes any sort of stimulus, you'll react emotionally to that stimulus if you have a small window, a small space available. Now, if your space is bigger, you have a bigger space available, then instead of being reactive in your decision making, you'll be responsive in your decision making. And the responsiveness of the decision making can handle more stimulus. Essentially, you can handle more stress. A very common metaphor that's used a lot in performance field is traffic, for example. So when you're in traffic at the end of the day, your energy is minimized. You've largely been indoors under artificial light, according to the 9 to 5 assembly line, which is the industrial age job. If you're in that type of workforce, obviously this is different off of different jobs, but essentially if you're in the pocket of reality that drives home at the 5 o'clock window pre-dinner rush hour, you find a bunch of reactivity and emotional instability. And that is based off of the concept that people are tired and fatigued. And so their conscious space has minimized. So any stimulus triggers them and they get reactive. The goal is to expand that space so that you can handle more stress and stimulus that's coming into your world, and you can be a problem solver. So you have access to your prefrontal cortex, which is where it's like the executive center of your thinking is your prefrontal. And that prefrontal cortex, if it can rationally, logically solve problems in real time, the theory is that you are a responsive person and you are a performer. In my world, that's the essence of high performing people who can solve problems under pressure in real time. And so you want to have a healthy physiology in order to expand the container so you can handle more stimulus and you can respond appropriately to real-time stress. That's how that system worked. And then once you were able to solve problems in real time, then you had awareness. And so that actually came up to pillar one. So you didn't get to awareness unless the bottom floor, being the physiology, was foundationally strong. And then that middle ground, which is where the consciousness of rationale and logical analytical thinking of the consciousness part of the conscious part of the brain, humanity, until that expands and you're responsive, then you get awareness. And so that was that was a major system. That was sort of, if I look at my life in 3 tiers professionally as a teacher, the first one is that Diamond series. That was kind of like the birth of how I developed content. The second one was that 3 pillar system. And in that pillar system, that's why I got into so many of the modalities like breathing, sauna. I wasn't into sound bathing just yet or acupressure just yet, but I was into grounding, I was into balance, I was into cold exposure, I was into nature, time in nature. I was into all these modalities that expanded and helped healed, but also strengthened physiology to allow you to build a bigger container. And that's tangible. So it's a little bit more, it is more tangible than the Diamond series, where the Diamond series can kind of have its own iteration. It has its own iterations to it, but it has it's rooted in mostly a mental framework. The second, I would say, evolutionary stage of my career came in those pillars, and that became a little bit more tangible, a little bit more objective, because you could start to do real-time training with those modalities that I just mentioned to expand consciousness. You could build a container within that consciousness, and it would allow you to at least slow the movement of traffic that happens from the limbic system, which is where our emotions are. You kind of have your brain stem, your limbic system sits on front of the brain stem, and then your neocortex, but your prefrontal cortex sits in the front of the brain, but your big cortexual part of the brain kind of wraps around the brainstem and the limbic system. And so, from a neuroscience standpoint, they call it limbic friction when the limbic system kind of dips into the conscious movement. And so you want to create space from the limbic system of the prefrontal cortex. You don't want to have that friction involved. And that's how you go from reactive with the friction to non-reactive reactive without the friction. And I found that you can create a lot of that space through physical training, which is what took a lot of my work from such solely mental frameworks to more of a physical framework. And I loved when I merged those two. Sorry, ears itching. I loved when I was able to merge those two from together. And then now, where I'm at now, I'm looking over to my left because I just wrote it on my whiteboard the other day, and I'm now gonna take a swing at it with you guys. Is where I'm at currently. So currently, I'm breaking my work into three pillars again. The pillars have changed, and I think that that's powerful. But the way that my pillars have changed now is I think of as pillar one, and I don't think it's well, let's just go through it. Pillar one is mental frameworks. So it's like an accumulation of awareness and the diamond series. And so I look at pillar one being your mental frameworks. That's more using philosophy. And I think the philosophy of the modern century is going to be mostly contemplative, not definitive in the way in which we create decision making. And I think that'll continue to dive more into contemplation because of AI and the systems that we've created to make a lot of our decisions for us. So, in order to be a good thinker as a modern human, I think you're going to have to spend a significant amount of time developing frameworks for your contemplation to improve. So, how do we do that? Well, my understanding of how we're going to improve contemplation is going to be through in understanding worldview and understanding interpretation. So coming to grips and becoming aware of your worldview. Now it's going to be difficult to do this because you're going to have to essentially identify yourself, right? So are you think of it in an anthro to a bio in terms of the way in which you experience nature, right? A lot of people don't view us as connected to nature where I do. I think that we are an organism in nature. I think that we are the mountains and the trees and the sun and the moon. And I think that we are a dust particle in the organ of the greater organism in the cosmos. I think that we're just another atom in the entire scope of cosmic energy. Therefore, when we hurt the planet, we're hurting ourselves. We're self-destructing because I keep that a biocentrism. I think that's how you say it, centricism. Biocentric is the easiest way to put it. But a biocentric viewpoint kind of keeps me in that middle ground. Like an ecocentric is all earth, right? Like anything that you would do to the earth is negative. If you mine any part of the earth, that's negative. And I kind of sit in the middle. An anthrocentric situation up top, that worldview, that's more thinking that we are not a part of nature. So it's a human centered lifestyle, and everything is for the meaning of humans. So all animals, every tree is for us and our necessities, and we can use nature. And I think that that gets a negative confrontation, but that's not right either. There's a lot of positives to eco. There's a lot of negatives to eco. There's a lot of positives to anthro. There's a lot of negatives to anthro, and there's a lot of positives to bio, and there are a lot of negatives to bio. So it's just more of trying to understand what your worldview is in the cosmos, and that's the whole. So how do you view the universe, right? And like I said, my viewpoint, my worldview is filtered through the sense that we are organisms just like anything else, and we're a part of nature because we are nature. And therefore, a lot of my modalities are going to at least program themselves to initially start through natural substances. So that's why breathing to me, breath work is a medicine. because your lungs are the shape of trees. So if you can go out and do breath work in trees by trees and use the oxygen CO2 movement, and you're in a clean, unpolluted, air polluted situation where the air is clean, then you can heal the fibers in your body and you can neutralize the blood supply in your body. You can oxygenate your muscle tissue. You can oxygenate your brain. You can alleviate anxiety and pain. And but you have to do that. You have to do breath work, which takes time. So I would be in the camp that that is the appropriate decision to make over taking an anti-anxiety medication, right? Again, I'm not a doctor at all. This is just my worldview. My worldview is perceiving it as you can do things naturally to keep yourself healthy or heal if you're sick or in pain. Same thing with heat and cold. Same thing with food. Food is a medicine. Movement is medicine. Walking is a medicine. You have to do it. You have to walk. I think walking is the movement of nature. It's how we shake up the body. You need sunlight, just how a plant needs the sun, we need the sun. So, anyways, I'm getting off topic. But, anyways, you need to grab a hold of a worldview, see how you view the world. And that is not in judgment or comparison to anybody else. You could completely disagree with me. That's not the point. The point is that you understand your worldview to living and your experience to living. My friend and I had a conversation the other day. I believe that you can drink raw milk. I drink raw milk. He didn't believe that you can drink raw milk. It doesn't matter because it's worldviews. So, and we didn't talk about this. It just didn't matter. I'm just using this as an example. So, understanding your worldview helps you understand your framework. You can use that in a religious aspect. You can use that in a political aspect. How you perceive the world through your worldview is largely going to filter information through, which is the next part of this pillar one, which is interpretation. So how you view the world through your worldview is how you create stories, and you filter all information through your interpretation, which is how you essentially become independent, interdependent, codependent, dependent. Those sort of things. It's basically how you filter paradox. So how you individually filter data that you receive is I don't want to like poke light at our psyche, but I think all our stories are illusions. They're all fabricated, not in lies. I don't think we know our own story. So I don't think we'll ever know the story of the world because we don't even know how our true story is about ourselves. But that's also not the point. The point is trying to understand the framework in how you interpret information and how you receive it. So I think that you're going to interpret information differently if you went to a public school versus a private school or you got homeschooled. Doesn't mean it's good or bad. Just going to interpret information differently. I think you'll interpret information differently if you grew up in the Midwest or the South or South America or China or Australia or California. I think that you will interpret information differently and it'll be filtered differently. So I think that interpretation, worldview, then understanding interpretation, and I think that those two together will form your egotistical character of being, the state of being, which is what I consider the mind and body. So the mind and body vehicle, the physical form of our mind and body is material ego. There's nothing wrong with that. It's how we use the ego to navigate life and what we're doing in life. But that's our state of being, right? So I'm being a podcaster right now or a teacher. I'm being a dad later on. I'm being a friend. I'm being an athlete. I'm being a breathing practitioner, whatever. That's just my character. It's my character in which my ego seeks achievement both mentally and physically through the mind and body. And I'm just using those as vehicles, right? And the state of becoming is more of what it will get into at the end of these pillars, but the state of becoming is more of my essence. That's more of my contemplative sense. That's my curious seeking, question asking person. right? It's different than the ego because the ego I can objectively measure. My state of becoming is more subjective, more abstract. But that's pillar one, and that's how we understand information. So if I just simplify it, it's basically pillar one is mental frameworks. It's our philosophy for the world, and it's how information is objective and tangible for reality. And I think that we individually understand information through first our worldviews that are in multiple categories, multiple of the systems that are already in place in society. And then through the worldview, that starts to form your minute maybe, but also your macro and micro, we'll say, yeah, both those interpretations of reality. So it's how you filter the information. Goes into your interpretation based off of the truth of your experience that you think you've had or you're having. And then that's basically what forms the ego. So your state of being, mind, body, ego, which is all material, it's the character you play, right? It's your personality essentially. That's how that curates itself. And that's all information. That's all physical form that we have in reality. Then part two, when I shift over, the subjective part of reality is more emotional. So this is how we take data and information and we change movement. We actually do things. And emotion, we won't be able to receive information without emotion, right? So if you have multiple miscarriages and you have an emotional connection to the reproduction process, your decision makings for avoiding a potential miscarriage is different than someone who's never had a miscarriage because they might not have the emotion to it. So we can both have access to the same information, but in terms of depending on what the result needs to be, somebody who has never experienced miscarriages is not going to have the emotional connection to people who have had miscarriages. And miscarriages are very relevant in society. So today. So you'll see differences in that. And the information may be the same of reproduction, but the emotions are different. This is one of the reasons why I talk about this often about how this is the information era. We have all the information accessible ever about how to be healthy, but this is considered the most unhealthy culture ever in humanity. We're especially in the West, right? We're extremely obese. We have tons of cancer issues. We have dementia. We have ADHD. We have OCD. We have all kinds of chronic illnesses. We have tons of anxiety, all this stuff, and yet we have all the information that tells you how to not have those things. And so that right there tells us that information does not drive behavioral changes. Emotion drives behavioral changes. So the first pillar is becoming aware of info. The second pillar is intuitive action, is what I'm calling it, which is what creates emotion. And intuitive action is more tangible in modalities. So we meet our emotion. We're moving into subjective, our essence here. We're moving away from personality. We're moving more into our contemplating self. So I think that now takes place aggressively through the word action. We can change that into movement or practices. And this is becoming some of our, in a lot of the environment, it can be biohacking, but biohacking is essentially a way to get there faster than just living with nature, right? It's like a way, instead of walking up the mountain, you get dropped off on a helicopter. So instead of being in sunlight, you can just use red light. Instead of grounding your feet, you use a PEMF machine, PEMF, electromagnetic machine. Instead of breathing, you take, an anti-anxiety medication. But intuitive action is things like breath work, it's frequency, vibrational work, it's grounding, it's sunlight, it's sleeping, it's thermal regulation. And in all these practices, you connect with your soul, which I think is very deeply rooted in a lot of these ancient practices. That's what the ancient practices were doing so often. Yeah, they were using cold exposure and heat exposure for medical purposes thousands of years ago, but they were also using things like sauna and the to hit the steam of a song as a prayer. And so it was very spiritual. And we still do this today. I'm just acknowledging, not biohacking, not that I'm not against biohacking. I'm just talking about as the action steps to live a world of intuition. I think that you need to walk, you need to be in the sun, you need to meditate, you need to do breath work, you need thermal regulation, you need electromagnetic energy, which is just grounding, getting your bare feet to the ground, letting the negative ions take and that kind of connection happen throughout the system. You need to shake. That's any type of energy work, qigong, tai chi. I like doing frequency work with sound bowls, tuning forks, drums. I have a drum right next to me. Just getting some sort of beat, some rhythm, music, dancing, humming. You can even hum on your own. That's a vibrational frequency work. Internally, you can hiss. You can do all sorts of things, but that creates emotion. And that paired with your acknowledgement or awareness to info is what brings us to the final pillar, which is ego and essence, which is what I think life comes into as a completion. Essentially, you have two parts of suffering that are needed to be whole. So you have material suffering, which is ego. That's all the ego deaths that we experience in maturity. So you have birth, youth, maturity, and death. And in your youth, you're essentially establishing your ego because you're learning how to survive and achieve and climb the mountain. And in maturity, you have to have ego deaths. You have to you have to use the ego, but you need to know what you're using, because so often the ego beats you when you're going through the maturation phase. And that's fine. It's just part of the human experience, but it's in physical mind body form. And that's where ego is material suffering, where essence is more of a spiritual, soulful form. And that spiritual suffering, that's higher power, that's life beyond. That has to be rooted in curiosity and questioning and seeking. And so you can't really, you're limitless. You can't get to completion. And that's where we walk in faith. So you can walk in ego and you can create rationale and logic and gather knowledge and experience. You gather your essence through exploring and going into the unknowns. You become wiser and calmer, but you have to do that in not knowing what lies ahead, which is largely what faith is used for. You acquire a faith to tackle what's ahead of you without knowing it. So that's what I'm working on. That's what I'm working on this week. Been working on it. Hopefully that helps you guys as a little setup. It'll get cleaner. It'll just keep getting cleaner as I practice it. But that's where my content has largely come to. And going back to not having titles, I'd like to have a title. That's why I think Without Words, with my last book, Without Words, so much of the content in it, it really, if I sum up the book, it's just that life is without words, mastering the state of being. You're mastering the ego, and you're doing it with your understanding of your essence, which is without words, because your spiritual path is an unspeakable thing, immeasurable thing. So yeah, I think I'm gonna work on a title. That'll be my objective. All right, thanks for listening. Hope you guys are doing well, and much love to the Diamond series. I mean, come on, that thing started me off. So Diamond series, is great to talk about you again, and I appreciate all your love. Love you guys. Have a good day.